Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Catherine Brown. I'm a research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute. We are an environmental think tank based in Sweden, but with 8 centers around the world. I'm going to introduce our panelists shortly, but before I do, I just wanted to say a few things briefly about our topic this evening. So today we'll be discussing financing for locally led climate action. I think we all know that meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, so limiting warming and also adapting to what are now unavoidable climate impacts, will require climate action at all governance levels, including the local and subnational level. And I think this is particularly the case for climate adaptation, which is often highly contextual, reliant on local knowledge, and usually most effective when it's locally owned and locally led. And the Global Adaptation Commission has recognized this in what are known as the 8 principles for locally led adaptation, which are designed to try and drive forward this agenda in the adaptation community to try to shift projects and programs and funding to be more locally led. So over 130 governments and global institutions and NGOs have endorsed these principles. As I said, there are 8 of them, but I'll highlight just 2, which I think are most relevant for our conversation this evening. The first is devolving decision-making to the lowest appropriate level, and the second is providing patient and predictable funding. So I think in a lot of ways, we're seeing this agenda really build momentum, especially with multilateral development banks and other major climate funds that are working to channel funding directly to the local level, to local level organizations like civil society organizations, businesses, et cetera, local governments. But even with that, best estimates are that only 17% of international funding reaches the local level, and I think we're all agreed that that's not enough. So this brings us to our panel this evening, and some of the key questions that we'll discuss. The first is, how do we scale up these efforts that are ongoing and enable locally led bottom-up climate initiatives, both adaptation and mitigation? And then critically, how do we measure success? How do we know if it's working or not working? And what evidence do we need at this point in time to improve delivery of finance to the local level? So this is the Climate Finance COP, after all. It feels very appropriate to be discussing this right now as we're all awaiting eagerly the next version draft text of the NCQG. So now I'll have the pleasure of introducing our panel, and I hope we'll be able to have a candid discussion about some of the challenges and opportunities in trying to get money to the local level and enable this locally led adaptation agenda. So the first I'll introduce is on his home turf, Robin Mearns, who is Global Director for Social Sustainability and Inclusion at the World Bank. Adiba Binti Kamal, who is coordinator for the Catalytic Grant Program at the International Center for Climate and Development, ICCAD, and then Ibrahim Abamba, who is regional manager for Francophone Africa for the Green Climate Fund. So, as I said, Robin's home turf. I'll turn to you first. The World Bank is devoting 45% of total financing to climate by 2025. And if we look just at the latest numbers from the last year, the World Bank is already at 44% with $43 billion committed on climate. So my question is to you, what strategies and initiatives is the World Bank implementing to scale up locally led climate action, and how does it plan to support local communities and governments in building resilience and adapting to climate change?
Thanks so much, Catherine. Great introduction, and it's really a pleasure for us to be partnering with you, with the Stockholm Environment Institute, for this session. We've been discussing here at COP over the last 10 days, how do we achieve the global climate goals and ensure a livable future for all? And at the heart of all of this, it has to really be about strong engagement and financing to local actors. This is my first time actually at a COP for well over 10 years. And I have to say, I see quite a sea change in the kind of conversations that people are having. There is so much more focus now on the people, on the human dimensions of the agenda than there was 10, 15 years ago. And I find that super encouraging. Now, having said that, and the point that you make is an extremely valid one, that still, while we're trying to shift overall financing for adaptation very substantially, we also want to see the share of that financing that reaches the local level increase very substantially. The estimates vary. I think you quoted a 17% figure. That might be on the optimistic end, but it's still too little. We want to see that grow very substantially. So the World Bank really has been stepping up efforts to try to put people and communities in the center of climate finance. There have been launch events for several flagship reports here at COP29. One was Rising to the Challenge, a key report on adaptation and resilience. Another is a synthesis report across a number of country climate and development reports, the CCDRs, that really synthesizes what are the people-focused, the human dimensions of climate action, including locally led climate action. But let me come more specifically to locally led climate action and what we're trying to do in this regard. So you mentioned, Catherine, the principles for locally led adaptation, and there are 8 of these. I'm going to zero in on 3 of them that I think are at the heart of what we're trying to do on this agenda. So the first is, as you say, it's really this principle of subsidiarity, devolving control over decisions and resources to the lowest possible level, preferably directly to communities themselves. It depends a little bit on the political economy whether that's actually feasible. It's not always feasible in every country. And we need to work with the country frameworks. Our clients for the World Bank are the governments. They're the country governments concerned, even though, of course, many other stakeholders also play a role. Civil society organizations, for example, as intermediaries in helping support communities in the planning process. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So it's really empowering communities and empowering particular groups within communities. Communities aren't a monolith. There are different interests within communities. By gender, for example, women having different interests from men. By age, youth have often particular interests and concerns. By disability status, we need to really tailor the solutions according to their needs and priorities. So the second principle is ensuring, and this is a twist and something that's relatively new. We've had long experience with community and local development programming that is about devolving control over decisions and resources to the local level. We've been doing that for quite some time. But what's relatively new is repurposing these approaches for climate action. And what's required there is to make climate science accessible and get it into the hands of local communities. Sort of downscaling projections, some interpretation of what the longer-term climate challenges may be in a particular context. Of course, communities, they have a clear sense of their own needs and priorities. Climate change manifests locally, and so locally tailored solutions are essential, and bringing local knowledge to bear is essential, but also the climate science. And here, communities are not all knowing. They don't necessarily have that longer run sense of what the challenges are. So making the climate science accessible in a way that helps inform the participatory planning process at the local level, I think is the key with regard to this second principle. And then the third one is making sure that a local level bottom-up participatory planning process actually feeds into national climate change priorities and strategies and helps strengthen institutional capacities and country systems to be able to make sure that the funds actually flow in an accountable way down to the local level. It can take years to develop the plumbing in a fiduciary sense around intergovernmental fiscal transfers, and then getting the decision-making power down to the local level. So I really want to highlight that when we stress locally led climate action, but of course it doesn't mean that the responsibility rests solely with local actors, with local communities. It's local communities in partnership with local authorities and with higher level institutions, and putting in place the mechanisms for financing at scale that can be sustainable for the longer haul. And so in our current portfolio, we already have getting on for $5 billion worth of commitments across something like 70 operations, 70 countries or so. And our latest estimates are that this is reaching at least 100 million people through measures to strengthen climate resilience at the local level. In programs that are under preparation, for example, in Tanzania, Indonesia, the Philippines, Rwanda, there are a number of Bangladesh. We would reckon that we would at least double that number of people that are benefiting from these programs by 2030 or so. Let me just end with just one example. I think it's a really nice example from Guinea in West Africa, and I'm very happy that Ibrahim is with us on the panel. Guinea, the project is called in English the Support to Local Governance Project, or PAGL is the acronym in French. It's an $81 million project, and over the next 3 or 4 years or so, it's going to be working with 356 of Guinea's 362 communes, and ensuring that at least 50% of the resources that are reaching them for community-led investments is actually focusing on the needs of women and youth in particular in supporting local level resilience. The other thing that I really like about PAGL is it's not just government budget financing. There is a share of extractive revenues from mining that is earmarked and dedicated for a local development fund. And so it's the private sector, it's extractive industry that's actually financing a lot of these local level investments in resilience. This is a sustainable model that I think many other countries can learn from. Mongolia is doing something very similar. So, this is a good start, these kinds of programs, but it's not enough. We have to scale up. We have to replicate. We need to see this happening at much broader scale. And we also need to be sharing knowledge across countries and embed learning approaches in how we understand what are the impacts, what are the quality of the investments. It's not just the quantum, but the quality as well. And how can we make sure that other client countries get access to information about these opportunities? Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate your point also about not passing on full responsibility to local communities, but recognizing that there's still responsibility at national and global scales. And I think part of the challenge is finding the balance there. Next, we'll turn to Adiba. I want to ask, from ICAD's perspective, how you see the locally led adaptation principles being taken forward in Bangladesh and globally, and what challenges we might be encountering, and how we know if funders are succeeding in getting money to the local levels and enabling local ownership.
Thank you, Catherine, for inviting me at this platform. I'll be sharing the voices of the community people, the local people, like what the challenges, how they are actually trying to get funds for taking initiatives. So let me introduce myself. This is Adiba. I work as coordinator for the grant-making program at the International Center for Climate Change and Development. We are based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. We work from Bangladesh to global. We are basically a research organization. We led by Dr. Salim Haq, late Dr. Salim Haq. So at Bangladesh, in terms of locally led adaptation, in any intervention, it has to come from policy side. Like, it has to legitimate by policies. Like, in recent policies, we have, there are few policies that mention about the work of locally led adaptation. Because earlier we used to actually focus on community-based adaptation. So current policy on national adaptation plan, the locally led adaptation word wasn't mentioned directly, but it was there was a mention like taking the local people on planning, taking their voices on the planning. That type of words were mentioned, as well as in the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. The same thing was mentioned. And in terms of implementation at the ground level, NGOs, IONGOs are taking this locally led adaptation word very seriously. Like they are now they know the failures. Let me just share a small story that if you visit in any remote area of Bangladesh, like Satkhira, Shamnagar, you will see that many interventions done by NGOs are not used, are just said like they were like. Community people are not interested to use those. Like if it's rainwater harvesting, situation, or weather data board. Because when we ask like why you are not interested, they said there is no ownership thing in this. Or while implementing these type of intervention, NGO didn't thought, or the government or the INGOs didn't thought to ask us like how we would like to use it, type of answer that we get. So they remain unused, they remain just like the way they were set up. That's the thing. But still, currently with the discussion, like with the findings, with the failures, with the documentation of different cases, NGOs, INGOs have taken the locally led adaptation thing very seriously, and now they are inviting the local people, they are capacitating the local people, they are listening to the local people, local knowledges while implementing a plan or development project on ground. That's one thing. And another point that I would like to mention, that currently there are many grant-making programs that are being introduced. And one thing that I mentioned about the grant-making, that like many giant funds, grant-making doesn't require too much paperwork, too much legal documents. So the local people, the local NGO people, the youths can actually apply to different type of grants. Through these grants, they can have the access to fund or financial resources so that they can implement or initiate their activities at the ground. So these type of financial assistance or funding mechanism are actually helping to accelerate the activities in locally led adaptation on ground. Did I miss anything or?
Nothing. You missed nothing.
Oh, sorry.
Totally comprehensive.
Yes.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Ibrahima, I'll turn to you next. So we know the Green Climate Fund, of course, dedicates 100% of its funding to climate and is a particularly important source for adaptation, especially for small island developing states, least developed countries, and sub-Saharan Africa. So can you speak to how the GCF is carrying these principles forward, what specific initiatives, and then also how you're measuring success?
Okay, thank you. During this COP, on Monday, November 11, GCF officially endorsed the 8 principles of locally led adaptation during this COP. But locally led adaptation is not new to GCF. It's not new to GCF. We have currently 6 approved programs on locally led adaptation, but it's also well integrated in our existing programming document. It's well integrated into. Also, it's aligned with our investment and sustainability framework. This allows for stronger safeguard and also stronger consultation at the ground level. We do have a goal of doubling the number of direct access entities. Direct access entities are local institutions accredited by GCF to implement in their own country. Through the enhanced direct access entity, they can work directly with local institutions, as my colleague from World Bank say, principles of subsidiarity, making sure that local institutions have a say in the resource, in the planning, and in the use of it. This is very important. Another critical aspect for us is local ownership. Local ownership is very important. Local capacity building and working with local institutions, strengthening their capacity. We've been doing that, and our strategic framework for the next 4 years include that we should target at least 40 to 70 projects which are locally led. So this is very important. We also have working with locally led adaptation through our readiness program. Our readiness program is a program designed to help developing countries access and manage climate fund. Through them also, we help local organizations adapt or making sure that the NDC are adapted to local level, making sure that the planning and the implementation are locally informed. And also, as my colleague have said, making sure that local knowledge are integrated into the NDCs. So with the official endorsement, we can now scale up. Because we have the ambition of doubling the number of direct access entities, and particularly those we are programming with.
I'm very excited that we just made news on our panel tonight. Okay, so yeah, next round of questions. I'd really like to drill down on this question of learning and evidence. You know, how do we've seen these principles go forward. You know, one clear indicator is, well, how much money is reaching the local level. But, you know, adaptation is also a process, and we also want to look at it in terms of outcomes. So I'm wondering for each of you, and maybe in a couple of minutes, how do you see that evolving? What do we need to be learning? What forms of knowledge do we need to be exchanging in order to determine how this is working and how to improve it? Maybe I'll turn first to you, Robin.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine, for that question. In the World Bank, we have a new corporate scorecard. As of a few months ago, it was really launched during the annual meetings last month. And this drastically reduces the number of indicators and measures of success from 150 indicators in the previous scorecard down to just 22 core indicators. And one of those core indicators is around the millions of people that would benefit from actions to strengthen climate resilience. Now, of course, there's a whole set of sub-indicators that would feed into that and inform that. But that's the kind of headline that we want to be driving towards. As I mentioned earlier, our assessment is from our existing portfolio of projects supporting locally led climate action. We would estimate that at least 100 billion people are benefiting from such actions in the current portfolio, and that would be likely to double in the next 5 or 6 years with projects that are currently under preparation. Now, the way that we would unpack this is essentially to zero in on those design principles that are related to the LLA principles and just take specific measures for each of those. So the first design principle is really strengthening subsidiarity in climate finance, ensuring that the flow of funds actually goes down to the lowest appropriate level for the project to be addressing climate risk while ensuring accountability, transparency, and so forth. So there are specific measures around that particular principle that would feed into the overarching headline figure. The same is true for the other design principles around participation, inclusion, climate action, community empowerment, also to the extent to which decision-making is informed by climate science, etc. So there's a set of things that we're doing there. There's also a set of learning around how we actually measure resilience more broadly. And we have a new paper that just came out around resilience metrics. And resilience both to climate change, but also to other drivers of fragility, conflict, and fragility, for example. A lot of our portfolio of community-led engagements is actually in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So there are multiple drivers of vulnerability. We need measures to be able to get a handle on that. And then the final thing I would note here is that we need to embed learning within the programs themselves. And these are programs that are about long-term institutional change and institutional strengthening. And you know, it's very difficult to come up with a results framework at the beginning of a program that might last 20 years. And it's going to evolve a lot over the course of those 20 years. So we need ways to constantly evolve the learning. So we need mixed methods to be able to get a handle on the impacts, the evidence of change, the results narratives around the meaningful changes that these kinds of interventions bring about. So it's not enough. You know, in some cases we can do randomized control trials of certain kinds of intervention, but more usually it's going to be a range of mixed method, qualitative, quantitative methods to be able to get a handle on that learning. We also have a new paper on a learning agenda around community-driven, community and local development, including our work in locally led climate action. And so we'll be trying to roll that out as we move forward with these programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a big advocate for qualitative approaches. Adiba?
Yes. So from our center, we are initiating a low method to connect with the local level. That is divisional platform. In Bangladesh, we have 7 divisions. Last year, we tried to connect with 3 divisions, and this year we have a vision like in 2025, we will be connecting rest of the force. So we are doing divisional platforms of LLA, where we are inviting journalists, we are inviting local people, CSOs, to connect in a platform so that they know about each other, then can have the platform. Because often it's seen that not having a platform, they couldn't gather and they couldn't share any activities or work they are doing. So that's what we are doing at the divisional platform. So once we are done with the 7 divisional platforms, we will be actually connecting with our government system at the national level platform. So we will be then doing a national level platform, connecting both local NGOs, CSOs, community member with the national level policy members so that they can have that discussion. And after that, we are planning to go for South-South collaboration, South-South knowledge exchange platform, where we will be sharing this type of learnings. Like as Bangladesh is known for adaptation, because we have some practices like the floating garden, then a rainwater harvesting system. That's how we are adapting with the issues that we are facing. So what we will be doing is sharing those information on that platform, as well as we are documenting those things. Like currently we are emphasizing more on documentation, because mostly when we try to look for something, we do not find the documentation of that intervention properly. So we are currently emphasizing more on documentation. So through this way, we are taking this locally led adaptation thing forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ibrahima?
Yeah, I'll make 2 points. I think you can have sustainability without working with locally led local community, because they are the front line of climate action. You have to work with them. And also, you need to work with them in a predictable manner, predictable financing, working with them in a long run, because it takes time to build good institutions. I also believe that locally led action has several good features of community-driven development. In fragile contexts, they are very critical in building trust, social cohesion, and also impact, particularly in fragile contexts. Some of the learning.
Thank you. I'm just going to point out that before this, Ibrahima said there was no way we were going to get through 3 rounds of questions, and now we are embarking on the 3rd round. So I'm also going to go to you first due to that. Okay, so last question. Can you tell me and the audience, both here and online, what you think is one of the key factors to keep momentum behind the locally led agenda, keep it going?
I think we are already starting to have a greater number of institutions getting a buy-in. As I said initially, during this board, during this COP, GCF officially endorsed it. Now we need to socialize it, make a greater number of institutions with whom we are working. We are a partnership institution. We work mainly through accredited institutions, also buy into it, work with local community in their design, in their implementation, and in the evaluation of the projects.
Thank you. Adiba?
Listening to the local voices, it's always something that we need to keep on our mind. We shouldn't forget their knowledge, their contribution that they can do. Like often when we go to workshop, like one time I remember, I went to a workshop and I asked that if there is local voices or where are the local participation? They mentioned that we are not listening to the local people. We have experts. You guys are the experts. So we have bring you on the table. You will give us the solution. So that time I was saying to that in that workshop that no, we need to listen to the local voices. We need to keep their contribution in mind. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll go a little bit like Ibrahima on the point of partnerships among institutions, and in particular avoiding fragmentation. As far as possible, trying to harmonize efforts regardless of the source of financing. Actually, Kenya offers a very good example of this. the Kenya Financing Locally Led Climate Action Program, that now has, it was anchored with financing from the World Bank through IDA, the concessional financing arm, but crowding in grant co-financing from a number of bilateral donors that increases the overall concessionality to the government of Kenya. And the government of Kenya itself putting very substantial resources into this. And actually, there's even parallel policy support now from the IMF through their RST program. So that's one example. I think Bangladesh offers another example where, Bangladesh has been a global leader for decades on locally led climate action. But I think Adiba would probably agree with me that too much of what's happened has been too small scale, too fragmented. It hasn't kind of added up to really delivering a huge bang for the buck when it comes to strengthening resilience. So I think it's actually following the lead that civil society organizations have shown in Bangladesh, and actually crowding in government and getting government to step up and play its role, and then having international actors also come in to support government as far as possible with grant financing. And so I think these harmonized national platforms for support, it's going to reduce the transaction costs to all of the actors concerned, especially local authorities. They don't want to have to learn the different procedures of many different financing organizations. Far better that we just concentrate those efforts and achieve a huge result together in partnership.
Thank you. All right, you win the award for most succinct panel I've ever been a part of. So we actually have time now for questions, if that's possible. I think it is. Oh, we have one here. Yeah, go for it. And please introduce yourself.
Cameron Hall. And so my question's around access to financing, in particular for local organizations. They have the burden of trying to identify who the funding sources are, getting access to those funding sources, making contacts, navigating application processes, due diligence processes, reporting processes, which are mostly beyond the capacity of most local organizations. And so then you have an industry of intermediary organizations that honestly siphon off a lot of the money that should be going to these local organizations, and there's a whole industry around it. So my question is, one, how can we improve access on the administrative side? And two, is that connected to being more open about the risk tolerance of donors and helping and recognizing that there is acceptable risk to capacity building at the local level?
Do we have one more question? Maybe we could collect two. Any questions? No. Okay. Access. Any reflections? Robin?
I really like this question. I can't resist taking this if you don't mind. And I want to do so in reference to engagement with communities, with indigenous peoples and other local communities and their own representative organizations in the context of forest carbon partnerships. And so here, I think the key is that increasingly there are direct financing opportunities. We've seen this with the direct grant mechanism under the Forest Investment Program that's part of the Climate Investment Funds. We're also seeing it in relation to other funds. There are some extremely innovative experiments in Latin America at the moment, in Colombia and Ecuador, around potentially setting up indigenous peoples' banks to directly finance indigenous-led initiatives. And I think that's increasingly going to be what we're likely to see in the future, is improving direct access. I agree, that there are challenges around intermediation and the quality of the support that communities get. And some level of intermediation is critical, particularly in bringing the sort of climate science-informed participation in planning processes. But I think the way of the future is building on institutional strengthening to move much more towards these direct financing mechanisms.
Ibrahima?
Yeah, I remember attending recently a workshop organized by civil societies in Africa, and one of the key calls was to see them as partners not as beneficiary, partner in climate action, but because they do invest their own resource in addition to the subsidy that they may get through the different projects that we finance. But the key thing is into the arrangement during design, making sure that their voice are heard, and then accountability is high, so and everything will derive from that. But seeing them as partner, not as beneficiary, this is a key also.
Accessing finance can be also done. Like yesterday, I have come across an organization named We Directly. So they provide direct cash to the communities, vulnerable communities. So that can be on one example. And then there are so many grants, like grant-making programs, grant-making mechanism, how they are NGOs providing grants directly to the vulnerable communities. Like Climate Bridge Fund, there is one happening in Bangladesh where they are, BRAC is initiating this program, and they are actually collaborating with government people, because whatever you do, you have to also keep the government people on your mind, like initiating the idea. So that's how I think we can actually access and do the climate finance for the vulnerable people. Thank you.
I'll also just point out that one of the locally led principles is on building like deep-rooted institutional capacity. So in theory, you could build into grants sort of longer-term investments into incorporating or downscaling climate science or developing theories of change, so that applying to one fund or one grant could then make it lower the barrier to applying later on, or to re-upping support. It's kind of the idea behind it. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, we have one here. Thank you. Something I learned when I was training to be a teacher was that if you just wait long enough, someone will feel awkward and they will say something. So
I'm not saying it because I'm awkward, but I wanted to build off Ibrahim's point. During some of the work we were doing in Liberia recently, that was exactly the point that was made, that we keep seeing these actors as beneficiaries when they're actually leaders in themselves. And sometimes they're wearing two hats, but how to actually formally recognize that role. And they saw it as a transition where first they would have to be trained a bit, to what Robin, you were saying, sensitize them, train them, because they have their own caliber, but perhaps they miss some of the skill sets around the climate set of issues. The second question I had was, I think when you started off, you said there were 7 or 9 principles of the locally led.
8.
8, okay, fine, got somewhere in the range. And I wonder, from the sense of all of you being experts in this area, if we had to think of a way of measuring it, what would you see to be 1 or 2 metrics that we could use? Because my colleague here who leads on the adaptation side, we talked about that scorecard indicator. The ultimate thing is, how do we measure that we've actually achieved that? What is the metric?
Can you just introduce yourself quickly?
Oh, my name is Kanta Kumari Rigo. I'm a lead climate specialist at the World Bank.
Thank you. Any volunteers?
Well, every development intervention is evaluated at the end, assess in terms of relevance, impact, on revenue, gender. So I think by including beneficiary at every stage of an intervention, I think we got a better chance of having interventions that are more impactful, that achieve the result we want in terms of sustainability and long-run ownership of it. So this is also another important dimension of the agenda for locally led adaptation. The ownership and the ability to affect their own environment using the knowledge and also the support that we provide over the long run. So I think evaluation and also listening to them, also the self-appreciation of the result that have been provided in the field.
So at our center, we used to have a grant-making program, small grant-making. It was really small, 5,000 USD for a year. So in that program, I often were questioned, or people wanted to know, like, how do you know it's success or it's fail? So how do you measure? Because in the grant making things, you cannot assume like it will be success, it will be. So what I used to do as a practice is when I asked, it used to be an open application, like anyone can apply for that grant with a simple application, like they have to share their idea, what they want to do is with the grant. So once they shared their idea, once they shared their budget and plan with the grant, I used to look on those items, like the plans they have mentioned, like if they want to do a workshop, how did the workshop went? If they are doing a tree plantation, say for example, how many people that he included in the tree plantation? Was there youth, women included in the tree plantation, or how they have actually done this, that type of activities that they have shared initially that they will be doing that. That's how we used to actually evaluate and monitor the grant making programs. Thank you.
So Kanta, great question. And to start with, I would say that many of the locally led climate action programs that are being rolled out now are using our program for results financing instrument as opposed to investment project financing. Kanta knows what this means, but for those in the audience who may not, essentially what it means is you're financing the results of a government-led program. And so the indicators, we call them disbursement-linked indicators, you could unpack whichever are the design principles allied with the principles of the LLA principles. So it could be, you would have some that would measure climate-informed planning, for example, science-informed planning, or alignment with the national climate change strategy or adaptation plan. There's a number of things that you could then unpack, and these could form some of the DLIs under the program. The other thing I would mention is the crucial importance of disaggregating data. This is true for all of the corporate scorecard indicators, but we need to understand who actually is benefiting. Men, women, youth, other people with disabilities. So let me just give a shameless plug. We're also about to launch the Disability Data Hub, which is a way of better disaggregating data so that we're able to capture and assess impacts for people living with disabilities.
Thank you. I'll also say from my perspective, moderator's prerogative, I think this is like a massive unopened scientific question about adaptation effectiveness. I mean, we don't have a sense of what effective adaptation looks like in terms of outcomes, especially with like the radical uncertainty of what the future looks like in many local contexts. So I would advocate now for, especially at the local level, looking primarily at process and not outcomes, because we just don't have a sense. But we do have a sense that things are at least stronger when they're locally led, when they're based on local and traditional knowledge, and when they have sort of equitable processes behind them that include many different types of decision makers and stakeholders. So, but I think the challenge for institutions like the World Bank is to try and translate that into practical indicators and metrics. And I mean, if you look at like the global goal on adaptation, they have 6,000 indicators, which shows you the complexity and the difficulty to translate it into something in practice. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank our panelists for such succinct and insightful responses. So quick round of applause for the panelists, please. And thank you all very much for joining. Have a lovely night.